I'm Tony Stringer, a lay minister, but obviously not a musician. But I wanted you to hear this sound. It is a sound that reminds me of something I treasure. I've always been in search of family, and there's no mystery about why. My parents were never together save that one night when they conceived me. And my parents were old, far too old to let passion overwhelm their good sense, though I owe my existence to that momentary lapse in rational thought. My parents were old to be having a child, he in his 50s and she in her 40s. I was not part of either one's life plan. I was an accident. Even worse, my mother was the youngest of 7 siblings. So everyone in my accidental family was even older than she was. I bring up the rear of my generation of the family. I was my mother's only child, and I came so very unfashionably late. So late that it seemed that every act in our family drama had already taken place, was already in progress, or was just about to end. Grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles were constantly departing. I lost my father when I was 7, my grandmother when I was 14, and nearly lost my mother at 13 to one of the many infirmities that would plague her senior years. So little wonder that as soon as I reached the age of maturity, I set about creating my own family. I married into an existing family, already partly fashioned by my wife, now of 40 years, just this past Tuesday. A family composed of her and her 2 daughters. A family that happily kept expanding, first with a daughter of our own, and still later with a granddaughter. I thought my search complete with the birth of that granddaughter. It was all the family I had ever imagined. And then I learned I had a sister. Now here's where I wish I could tell you a funny story about my sister, Iris Yvonne Wilson. But I can't. I don't have any funny stories. We didn't share a childhood together. We didn't share a life together. Indeed, our lives barely touched. The only funny thing I can say is that she wasn't a secret. No one was trying to keep her from me. It's just no one ever thought to mention her to me. When my father's marriage ended, my half-sister Iris moved with her mother to Chicago, where she grew up. I grew up in Detroit with my mother. Iris was 30 years my senior, and I 30 years her junior. Our paths did cross once at our father's funeral, but we never spoke. And what would she have said to a 7-year-old trying to comprehend death, this mysterious new thing that made adults cry? And it was another death that brought Iris and me together. She found my name and phone number in a deceased aunt's phone book and decided to call this young brother she'd never met to tell him about his aunt's passing. The details of my aunt's death barely registered with me on that phone call because all I really heard was, "Hi, I'm your sister Iris." I had a sister. Iris and I met only twice. Finding out she was 30 years older and hearing the frailty even in her voice, I arranged to meet her as soon as I could. We hugged when we met, and I proceeded to soak up every story from her life that she was willing to tell. My wife and daughter accompanied me on my second visit to Iris, and that was all the time we had. She was 30 years my senior, and her life was ending before our relationship could really have a chance to begin. But there were 3 things that instantly connected me to Iris, brief as our time together was. When I met her, remarkably, we were both reading the same book. I looked in her refrigerator and was surprised to find that it was full of my favorite soft drink. I looked on her living room table, and there sat an mbira, an African thumb piano. I have 14 of them, from all parts of the continent, and one from Brazil. Iris and I independently were collecting the same African instrument. 3 small coincidences in 2 barely intersecting lives, but all 3 telling me I had family all along. I had a sister named Iris, and we treasured some of the very same things.